Karin Emery is gonna actually host because this was her idea. So Karin, I could stop sharing my screen as well, but the panel on union organizing and solidarity.
Hey, Jake, thank you. So I was thinking while Jake was talking, I was multitasking because I've had several ways that I wanted to start the panel tonight and the things that I wanted to say. So I'll say a few remarks, and what I'd like is I'd like each of the panelists to talk about their union experiences and with organizing, and I'd like to focus the conversation locally and then talk a little bit about solidarity and then open it up to questions from everyone who's at the meeting tonight. So my first comments are, I think that, a lot of us have watched the January 6th hearings, and we've all lived through this. We've all been living through this pandemic. The pandemic's not over. And some kind of neat things have started to happen. So one of the things that happened is Starbucks, the workers at Starbucks started organizing, right? So I think they have now, Nicole, keep me honest, I think they've got like over 200 Starbucks stores have organized as unions, right? The Amazon Bessemer, one of the, Amazon, I can't remember how much money they pour into union busting, but Bessemer was like a big deal. And I don't know if, they did a second election, and I can't remember what happened with their second election. But at the same time, Chris Smalls up in New York started Amazon Labor Union, right? So he started from scratch with he had no experience organizing. And he organized Amazon, and then in that one area in New York, and then across the country, people are calling Chris Smalls. In the meantime, Amazon continues with their union busting. They were in court about a month ago to bust that. And then everybody here in Maryland finds out that the Apple store in Towson is organizing. Okay, so I started with a comment about, the art gallery. That's the other place, the art gallery in Baltimore. I can't remember the name of the art gallery, but they organized, right? So if you look at our picture, you'll see somebody pointing out in our graphic this week, I have somebody pointing out it's because the workers at the art gallery organized a union. Unions are the key to our democracy. And I don't say that lightly. If you study history at all, and you look at what was happening back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, when FDR was writing the New Deal, a lot of the stuff that we have now is because there was such a strong push for unions, right? Social Security, a lot of the New Deal programs, making sure that average people had what they needed to live and survive because there was such a push for unions, right? So we lived off that for a long time. And then in the 1980s, we kind of started a downturn. Unions became corrupt, and in fact, UPS just recently elected a new union leader. And one of the reasons he was elected is because the union leadership at UPS had been so corrupt for so long. And so they're kind of under a new day now with this new guy, Sean, and they're hoping to get better contracts and things like that. But there was some time, right, where like probably in the 80s, where unions did suffer from a lot of corruption, and then they were abandoned. Basically, the Democrats abandoned them in the 90s. I think, once you saw what happened with the air traffic controllers, that kind of was like a turning point where the president of the United States actually busted a union, right? And so now we're starting to see a resurgence of that. And how does organizing contribute to democracy? Because it's more people having a say about their workplace. I have never gotten to be part of a union. I would love to be part of a union. I actually believe that we need trade unions. I think, as I'm a project manager in IT, I think we need an IT project manager trade union. And I don't see any reason why just about everyone wouldn't belong to some sort of a union at one point. Just organizing with your neighbors, having more say about your life. I think it would make a big difference in how our world is. I think it would have made a big difference in how we responded to the pandemic. I think it would make a big difference in how we've responded to climate change. Okay, so that's my bit. So now I want to introduce our three speakers. So we've got three people here today, and I had my picture up so I could look at what I'd written down here. So we've got Nicole Dvorak, who's a longstanding member of PDHC, one of the founding members of our club. She's a member of the Baltimore County Public Library United. And then we've got Rashi Turniansky. They are a member of the Baltimore Teachers Union, or former member of the Baltimore Teacher Union. And then we also have Josh Lenes, who is the Uni-Serv director for MSEA and HCEA. So that being said, what I'd like is, Nicole, if you could take a few minutes, kind of talk about your union, and then I'll give Rashi and Josh a turn also. Then we'll talk a little bit about how it impacts us locally, and then we'll talk about solidarity and then questions. So go ahead, Nicole.
Okay, thanks. I almost don't even know where to begin because there's so much that you could talk about, but I'll try to compact everything. So I have worked for the Baltimore County Public Library System for not a long time, for a year. It's not a long time, and there were people who were already well into organizing a union there before I got there, right? It's not only, you can't organize a union with one person, it's got to be more people. And some of those people who started that effort are no longer with the library system because, the finance, you're not making a lot of money, and you organize a union partly, for a lot of people because you're not getting paid what you deserve to get paid, or it's not a healthy workplace for you. So, the union efforts in some cases, or in many cases, take years to reach the point where you get a contract in place. You have a vote, to see if the majority of your membership or potential membership, wants to move ahead with the union, then you get a contract in place. I mean, these things take years. So, in that amount of time, some people who are really integral to that effort, in some cases, they have no choice to move on for themselves, to get paid more, to be more respected where they work. So I want to acknowledge the people who came before me, who have put in so much, and I respect their work, and I want to honor them because some of them are no longer with this effort, and want to acknowledge the other people who've worked so hard to get BCPL employees to this point, because it's not easy. So with that said, in the years that led up to this, I think some people started this effort 2017, 2018, at least 4 years later. So we had a vote at the end of December for our membership. Do they want to affiliate officially with machinists as their representative to unionize? It was an overwhelming yes. 77% of the votes. We had 277 people vote yes. This is a large unit. This is a bargaining unit of about 450 members. Are eligible members. So that happened at the end of December. I was on the contract negotiating committee for a good chunk of this year. And our contract, well, at least the effective date was July 1st. So that's the short story. I could say a lot of other things, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Thanks, Nicole. So Rashi, do you want to talk about your stuff? Talk about your union and your experience.
Yeah, so I became a teacher in part because of my experience helping with the efforts of the rank and file movement in the Baltimore Teachers Union to unseat the former leadership of that union. And they succeeded partially in 2019. They got half of the seats and the presidency on the executive board. And they did that by actually organizing the members to educate them on what a union actually is supposed to be about, and the differences between service unionism, which is like contract negotiation, make sure you get like a slight pay raise every so often, grievances and things like that. It's very much like you hire some lawyers to negotiate for you. That's what service unionism is. And that's not what the Baltimore movement of rank and file educators, which is associated with the national rank and file educators movement more. And that was successful in getting the teachers chapter executive board seats and the presidency. And then this year they had another election and were able to get a few more seats in the PSRP chapter. So now they have a strict majority and they're able to do a lot more. And that's because in the time that they've been in the leadership, they've done a lot of good and they've challenged their members to actually be engaged with the union. And they've championed a whole lot of really important causes, particularly during the pandemic. The second the pandemic hit, schools closed for a little while, and there was plans to reopen at the beginning of the next school year, and the union was able to push for that initial the beginning of that school year to be a completely virtual start. And also a bunch of us rank and file members, including myself, we organized our own task force that wasn't really associated with the leadership, because that's their entire philosophy of the new leadership, is the members should be doing things that isn't just top-down direction. And so we had a COVID safety task force that was involved in things like educating members about what COVID actually is, about the issues that we face, the demands that we need to make to the district to make sure that we are safe during COVID. And we had some successes there. Not enough successes though, because I eventually did get COVID, and that's why I'm no longer a teacher, because I couldn't stand being forced to expose all of my students to COVID or possibly get COVID again, because you can get reinfected over and over, and the district doesn't seem to care about safety anymore. So during my time as a teacher and as a member of the Baltimore Teachers Union, I did a lot of organizing around membership engagement, getting people who aren't members to become members, getting people who already are members to engage more with committees and with the various actions that the union needs the membership to be able to do, to not just be this business oriented union that has failed for so long.
Thank you, Rashi. Josh Lenes, and am I saying it right? Is it Lenes or is it Lenes?
It's Lenes.
It's Lenes.
It's a little bit of a yeah, no worries. It's a strange one. First, hats off to Nicole and Rashi for doing the hard work. Organizing is hard work. It takes guts. It takes conversation after conversation, and it takes endurance to do those over a long haul. And what Nicole said about standing on the shoulders of folks who came before us. I'm one of those people. Everybody who works in the labor movement, who is one of those people. I'm an organizer and a rep with HCEA and MSEA, but I'm also a proudly unionized staff member of the Professional Staff Association of Maryland. Whoop, whoop. And I came out of the labor movement when grad assistants were organizing in early like 2010, 2012, around then. And I've been working in the movement ever since then. What's happening, I just came back. I'm not sure if either Nicole or Rashi was at Labor Notes like a month ago, but it was, Labor Notes is a conference and an organization devoted to labor education, specifically with a focus on member power in unions and democratic unions. What's happening right now in the labor movement is I haven't seen anything like it in the last decade. It's totally exciting what Starbucks workers and Amazon workers and workers of all stripes are doing, and how the pandemic has really forced a lot of people to consider what their work lives are really like, what they deserve, and what the expectations should actually be. And I think, like, more importantly, who's to blame for all of this, rather than trying to point fingers at each other. So I'll leave it there. I work with the Howard County Education Association, where the union is a union of over 7,500 members in Howard County. I had a lot of similar experiences to Rashi during the pandemic. It was excruciating for our educators, and I think that feeling hasn't left. I think a lot of educators have now woken up and are very deeply distrustful of the systems under which they work and are ready to stand up for themselves, and I am here for it.
Thanks, Josh. Okay, so this is a really good starting place. So here's what I watch Labor Notes. It happened, I'll watch anything that Bernie Sanders does, and he was at Labor Notes. And so I heard Chris Smalls talk, and I can't think of the guy's last name, Sean. He's the UPS guy that I was talking about earlier.
Sean O'Brien.
Yes, thank you. So, but anyway, I want to touch on what you said and what Rashi said about the teachers, and Nicole, just feel free to chime in. But, I saw a lot of the parents who were just so angry that their kids weren't in school, that it was virtual. And I saw a lot of people complaining that virtual was bad for the kids. But I want to talk about that, but I want to back up a little bit too, to say, in my personal opinion, and I'm very biased, let me just say, I am very biased as a pro-union person. I think unions are important. I think, everybody gets that. I remember when the West Virginia teachers went on strike, they weren't just asking for a pay raise for themselves, they were asking for supplies for their students. Like they were really cared about their students. And I think that fundamentally, the way we talk about unions in this country is very anti-union. So in England, and Josh, you probably are staying on top of all this stuff and will help me out here a little bit. In England, they had a rail workers strike, and the guy who was in charge of their union, and again, I can't think of his name, the news reporters would ask him something like, don't you think it's wrong to ruin everyone's vacation? You're making it difficult for them to get work. And he would totally flip that around and say, I think it's wrong that, that these people are paying this money to ride on this train, and it's going to fill the coffers of the people who own the trains, and none of it is going to the workers who are actually on the trains daily, making sure that the trains run safely, that the trains run on time. And I think the same thing applies a little bit to what happened with the school year, right? Is that I think like some of the things that I noticed is like I'd see a nurse or someone say, I don't understand why the teachers can't go to school. I have to go and take care of sick patients. And I think a lot of it was, I don't have these protections. Why should they get those protections? And the thing is, we should all get those protections. And so do you guys want to talk a little bit about, it wasn't just about keeping teachers safe, but it was also about keeping students safe during a pandemic, making sure people were getting what they need. And it was tough on everyone. I'm sure parents with special needs kids, especially, it was tough on them. But talk a little bit about that and how you think the union, could they have done better, or did they do what they were supposed to do? Rashi, John, Josh, either one of you guys want to take that?
Why don't you take it first, Rashi?
Sure. Yeah, the entire messaging of teachers' unions is correctly that we can't do our jobs unless our jobs are possible to be done, which means the best for us as teachers is the best for students. And that definitely includes being safe during a pandemic. And there was this myth that got spread around really quickly at the beginning of the pandemic that kids are immune to COVID or aren't as affected. And subtly, people were saying things like, oh, only a few kids will die of a disease that they don't need to be getting, which is heartbreaking to even consider saying. And the reason that a lot of kids weren't getting sick was because we closed schools for the entire spring semester of 2020 when the pandemic started. And as soon as schools opened back up, kids started getting sick again. people just don't really understand the science of COVID, which is why people are now believing that we're just done with the pandemic. And the importance of having a union that is well organized is that you can educate your own members, and you can also get this message out to everyone else, especially as a teachers union, which impacts the community. Like you said, people have their kids in school all the time, and so it's really easy to build those connections to parents and therefore to the broader population. And so a union that has good priorities and is philosophically and ideologically aligned with the idea that we're all in this together and that there is value to having militant labor movement is really important. So not just having a union, but having a good union. And that's why I was so excited about the new leadership of the Baltimore Teachers Union. And I do think, like you said, there are things that could have been done better, but we are living in, like you said, very anti-union times. The broader culture is an uphill battle to work against. And it requires a lot of careful planning and maneuvering and a lot of that hard organizing that Josh mentioned.
Yeah,
Josh, did you want to chime in?
I totally agree with everything that Rashi is saying here. It's important to remember that COVID isn't over and that we have a lot of work to do to fight for the health and safety of all of our members. You know, there's literally no more example that's perfect in a public school for why why it was right to and why it would continue to be right to follow the advice of public health professionals in a school where you have kids where there are a lot of people in a school. And when I even got some questions from some folks I didn't expect, you know, why is it that grocery store workers can work in a grocery store, but educators can't work in the school? And these are two, you know, completely different things. And to point out what you're saying, Karin, is that everybody should have health and safety protections where they work. Are there things that could have been done better? You know, I absolutely, sure. No kid, absolutely. There are always things that we could be doing better, but I think the question is different about like who was really on the side of educators and workers when this pandemic was going on, and it was us. And we were oftentimes a lonely voice. But what I do want to push back though on what you said about just that there are about parents who either faulted us or wanted educators to go back into school sooner. To be honest with you, I think there were far, far more parents and more families who understood the stand that educators were taking and were taking a stand with them or wish they could have taken a stand with them. Those voices were not always the loud voices in the room, but they were certainly there and were on the side of educators who were taking a stand for their students and helping take a stand to keep them safe.
Yeah, I want to add on.
Go ahead, Rashi.
I wanted to add on to that, that a lot of the people who did fight against virtual school because they need their kids to be in school for them to go to work were doing so because there were no real protections for people who couldn't stay home from work because of the pandemic. So there's a huge structural issue that goes into that cultural issue. So the people who were in support of virtual school and being safe were the ones who were informed enough to understand what's at stake and trusted their teachers and their teachers union to know what's best. But a lot of people couldn't even conceive of there being any sort of structural support for this necessary action.
I'm so glad that you made that one point. It gets back to what I said at the beginning. Everybody should be in a union. I can't, my dad is an electrical engineer. Obviously, he's retired for many years now, but he did not join a union. But there was an electrical engineers union, and he benefited a lot when the union would get a raise. He would automatically get a raise because a union was there. And I don't think a lot of people understand that if they had, that the teachers have excellent protection because they have a union. And that the idea that they go off to work and don't even think to themselves that they deserve to have what the teachers have. Like that would be a huge benefit for them. So Nicole, I want you to talk about the public library, because the public library can't really be virtual during a pandemic. So talk a little bit about that and, and the workers, and also the comment I saw that you made in there about the fact that you guys are not allowed to strike.
Yeah, well, I definitely want to say, when it comes to the comment on the structure, like the systems that don't support anybody well enough, right? It's like how many employees, how many parents working in so many different types of work situations that should have been more accommodating. They should have allowed for more telework. They should not have been as punitive as some of them were in the past couple of years. And the strain that put on them that then was transferred towards entities like the teachers and the teachers unions, it's like, like people everywhere deserve to have more flexibility there, better pay, all of those things, which then just makes everything better. I realize I'm preaching to the choir on that one, but I couldn't agree more with that. I started, when I started at the library, it was the middle of last year. I mean, the employees who had been there before that had already gone through all the things related to COVID, the libraries closing. So when I started, people were still surprised that the libraries were open again. But, it was still imperative that the union effort move forward because, things that I encountered, one example is, one point, it was either in December or January of this year. And January was not that long ago when Omicron was fierce and there were people lined up around the parking lots outside of libraries just to get a couple of rapid tests, right? During that time, I realized, and a lot of us found out, that our employer was not going to let us know if any of our coworkers had tested positive for COVID unless 5 of them had tested positive within the same 2-week period. Like, I don't need to know names, but we weren't going to be informed of that. Like, how, like, what? I would certainly want a union in my corner saying, maybe we can kind of talk about that. It also varied by branch. If employees could even have access to the COVID rapid tests that we were handing out in the thousands to the community, I could not get a COVID rapid test from the library that I worked at in January. I couldn't get one. I wasn't allowed. I had to go stand outside, as if we weren't members of the community, right? So the fact that we desperately needed a union only, that desperate need only compounded because of the pandemic. And I feel like a lot of employees felt that way at all workplaces. So I'm really glad that effort moved forward. It was certainly a challenge for those who had been working on it for so long, because the library system lost a lot of employees and had to kind of start over almost when it came to getting union cards signed, because you have to get 30% of your staff to sign union cards to say, like, hey, we want a union, to then have a vote. So they really had to restart that effort. So it just prolonged COVID delayed the union effort. So I'm really glad I'm really glad we are where we are now. But again, it should not have had to have been this hard. I think there are plenty of employees who would say that we had a very adversarial library administration. I hope that that's changing now, but it certainly was not easy for a lot of people to get it this far.
Yeah. I want to kind of turn the conversation a little bit here. So what we've got right now is we've got 3, I'm going to call you guys public sector employees. I think that's a fair generalization. So you guys aren't fighting for over profits. You know, like the Amazon workers are being abused, and not only they're being abused, but while they're being abused, Jeff Bezos is making enough money to take himself to space, right? And the Starbucks guy is, you know, making money hand over fist. But I think ultimately, you know, like we saw, was it meat packers who still had to go to work? Was it Smithfield? I can't remember which company. They still had to go to work at the heart of the pandemic, and their employer was lying to them about who had COVID. I mean, these are the types of things that people are putting up with, because we're kind of we're in a rebuilding. I'd say, Josh, you probably would agree with this. I think that unions are in a rebuilding moment. We have a long way to go, but union organizing needs political allies. And I think in the comments here we made a comment about like Nicole's union is not allowed to strike. How is that possible that we live in a blue state and some of our unions aren't allowed to strike? I don't know if you guys want to make a comment about that. Anybody? Josh, Nicole, Rashi? No?
Yeah. Democrat does not necessarily mean pro-worker, as we can clearly see by a lot of the elected Democrats that currently exist. There's not any, there's no threshold or standard that you're required to have like this position to be a member of either party. So without that, you can just say, I want to run as a Democrat, and also I despise unions, and you can still get elected if you have lots of money and lots of institutional support, especially from the businesses that support you and don't support unions. So that's the state that we're in across this entire country, red or blue, is that it's way easier to get elected if you have that corporate backing, and that means you hate unions. So right. The code of law that currently stands in Maryland does not reflect what someone who calls themselves a progressive Democrat wants, because this is not a progressive state, it's a blue state.
Yeah, Josh, did you
strikes have a very important history in the labor movement for a good reason. But it should be pointed out that the law in Maryland is actually worse than just, public sector unions can't strike. It's that if you do strike, they'll take away your union, and that you won't be able to collectively bargain. You won't have you won't have a recognized union under the state. Most folks don't recognize that, so it's important to point out. And I'll just sort of leave my comments there. Thanks.
No, I think that's a critical comment, and that helps me transition, because I want to open it up to questions before we go too long, because I think, like the PRO Act, I think Nancy Pelosi did she get the PRO Act passed in the House? I think it passed in the House, but of course it's not going to pass in the Senate. The PRO Act would actually make it a lot easier for people to unionize. There's a lot of things in that act. And again, off the top of my head, I can't remember a lot of the details, but if, for people on the call, if you look up the PRO Act, I think that you can read up what's in there. One of the things that concerns me, and we'll talk about this now, is let's talk about unions in a political aspect. I think that when you have Democratic candidates running as progressives who don't support unions, that actually hurts all the workers, because it basically means, I mean, one of the reasons we created the pledge, right? Megan and everybody worked so hard on the pledge was we wanted candidates who were not just more accountable to voters, but we're working towards a better world, right? We're working for a more for candidates who will be more on the side of the citizens and less allowing abuses by business. We're not saying no business, because obviously everyone needs a job, but we want them to support unions, right? And I think by taking money out of the equation, that makes that a little easier. Now, the Citizens Election Fund, you can't take money from unions, but you're probably, if you're using the Citizens Election Fund, you signed the pledge, you're gonna listen, you're gonna spend your time listening to your voters, is what I think I'm trying to get at here, and I'm in too many words. But I think unions are critical in endorsing candidates. So do you guys want to talk about how you choose who you're going to endorse and what your political involvement is? And then I'm going to open it up to questions. Nicole, you want to start?
I don't know if I should start on that, since our union is so much newer than the teachers union. So we haven't even gotten as far as endorsing anybody. We're still trying to, like, who wants to be a union steward? Do you like, yeah, you want a union steward? Like that's where we are. So I'll defer to the other two panelists for that part.
Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, there was a write-up recently. Colleen did an interview with the Howard County blogger regarding our endorsements recommendations process. I actually staff the Government Relations Committee, so I'm very familiar with the process. And I think HCEA is proud and should be very proud of the democratic recommendation process that it has. Rank and file educators are part of the recommendation process at every single level, from the interviewing of candidates to making recommendations to our elected representative council, which has over 200 elected HCEA representatives. It's often a robust debate, but I think at the end of it, HCEA's recommendation is powerful because it's democratic and because people recognize it as such.
Rashi, you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I had a similar experience in 2020. So before this new leadership, there wasn't really a set endorsement process, including the criteria for who you would endorse, how you get membership input into the endorsement process. There was none of that. So I have no idea how the union made decisions like endorsements in the past. I think that it was basically just at the whim of the leadership. But in 2020, I was on the Committee on Political Education, or COPE, and I was an active part of the process of setting an actual endorsement process, including interviewing the candidates, membership engagement. We sent around surveys. We had thresholds for, like, if a certain amount of the membership votes and they vote a certain percentage for this person, that's who we'll endorse. Obviously, we do the questionnaires that we send out to candidates first so we can inform our membership. I would have liked to see that process be even more in depth by having more ways to engage the membership, rather than just sending out surveys and whatever any member could be a part of COPE. But obviously it's like, a dozen or so people. So that's not really that's not a good measure of what the rank and file actually thinks. So we could have done a whole lot more to get the members to be the deciding factor, rather than just giving them out a survey and saying, who do you want us to endorse? Actually engaging in political education. In that race, in the primary, we endorsed one of our own members for city council as a Green Party member, and she didn't succeed in winning that seat, but she got the most votes that any third-party candidate has ever gotten in the city, and that was the first time that the union had ever endorsed a third-party candidate. I don't think that the union really made any endorsements in this primary other than the new elected school board members. We used to have a fully appointed school board, just the mayor decides who the school board members are and just picks them. And now we have 2 members that are elected by the city, and our endorsed members got elected. Ashley, yes. Love Ashley Esposito. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that there weren't any other endorsements that were made. Because I'm not part of the union anymore, I don't know what the process was for making the decision on whether or not to endorse, but seeing the crop of candidates, I am glad that they didn't make an endorsement, because none of them would have been especially great for teachers or workers in general.
Thanks, Rashi. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and open it. So first of all, you guys, thank you very much. I appreciated that. Thank you for indulging me with my questions and letting me get my thoughts out there. So Hiri, did you have a question? Your hand is up. Hiri, oh, there it is.
Yeah, hey. Yeah, Karin, I had a question. So first, thanks to the panelists. This was a really good discussion. And I also want to co-sign on all the good things that Karin mentioned about unions. I'm definitely a huge supporter. I am a member of a union myself, and also I'm a member. I'm also a huge fan of teachers, because my dad is an educator himself. So having said that, I wanted to ask a couple of questions. One is a little bit more specific, and other is somewhat more broad, and wanted to follow up on the endorsement process with the local HCEA. First, I really thought it was great to see that endorsement process take place before the primary elections. I was just wanted to as someone who has followed the legislation and the legislation in the county council for the last 4 years, Josh, I wanted to ask the 2 council members in District 4 and District 1 had quite a starkly different record than the 2 council members in District 2 and District 3, in that it was clear, that District 2 and District 3 council members really had, frankly speaking, a terrible record when it comes to zoning and land use, and thereby, what it would benefit to the benefit that has to teachers. So just wanted to ask, and of course, even the county executive, who, I think that's, I wouldn't say much more than that. So I just wanted to know, I'm not from the outside looking in, I have no insight here. So maybe if you could speak to that, maybe wanted to see, if there was any, sort of insight to provide to, to a member of like the general public in terms of what that looked like, what the rationale was to sort of combine three elected officials with a terrible record with 2 elected officials with what I thought was what I think was a great record, and then just more broadly, to the rest of the panel, during the primary, one of the things that something that I picked up from other entities who were endorsing was that one concern is just to ensure that there's a great working relationship with the elected officials, that the endorsement would take place regardless of the, I guess, the record. So I'm wondering, how does a union ensure that they're endorsing the right candidates without the ability of losing effectiveness? So that's sort of like the more broader question, if that makes sense. Thanks.
Sure. As part of well, let me actually back up a second. So the HCEA has a government relations committee, similar to the COPE committee that Rashi was talking about. And the government relations committee guides its work using policy priorities that it develops and refines every year. So those policy priorities really run the gamut of compensation, staffing, especially special education. Those of you who've been paying attention know that we've been fighting really hard for the last for a long time, but especially in the last 3 or 4 years, to hire more special education staff and to pay them more. We've made a lot of progress in that area. Over 400 special educators have been hired in the last 4 years, 150 in the last budget. Additional issues like having to do with health and safety, or just, they really run the gamut. So I think what you're seeing there is just that that educators have their own priorities, and there's certainly, and I don't want to say that to any way diminish the work that you do or that others in the county do with regards to holding folks accountable when it comes to development. Ultimately, we also, when educators, rank and file educators, have to welcome every single kid who comes in through their doors, regardless of where they live. So that's another thing that we take into consideration. I hope that answers your question. And I guess I'll also point out that it's always up to the members of the union what they want their priorities to be. And those things often change over time, as recommendations have changed over time. It's all up to the members, and I think what's most important is that that process is democratic and transparent, and that everyone is encouraged to participate, and that once we all participate, we get out to elect people like Dan Newberger and Jackie McCoy for this next election, because the other candidates who are running, if the top 4 remain the top 4, voters are going to have a really stark choice about who they want to represent them on the Board of Education, whether it's folks who care about restorative justice in schools, and care about the lives of our kids. There's just never been a more stark choice for who we're electing in this upcoming Board of Education cycle, and we want all of our members to get active and be energized for those folks.
Piri, do you want to do a follow-up, and then we'll let Erica, I'll call on Erica next.
Okay, and I guess there was a more broader question, so that can wait for after. But I just to push a little bit there, Josh, and I share your concerns in terms of all those important programs that you're talking about, special education and those kinds of things. And I guess my concern is that given all those things need money, and the actions that those 3 elected officials that I mentioned were making decisions that had adverse impact on that money, I just did not see how sort of that was it didn't seem like that was on the same plane as the two other council members. So that's why I was asking if why that was sort of like how that was how it worked, like that decision making process. So that's my just follow up on that.
I mean, I hate to sort of repeat this, but it's really true that, you know, members create the priorities. Members participate in every aspect of the endorsement process. Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to. You're asking me why weren't these things accounted for as a union? But I think that's, and you know, I'm saying this respectfully, like sort of an outsider's perspective, and I think that folks within the union have a different kind of perspective about their elected officials, and at any time, if members want to change that or want to see things go in a different direction, they have the power to do that.
Thanks, Josh. Erica, do you want to ask your question? Erica Eaton?
Yes, thank you. I'm on a phone, not a laptop, as when I've Zoomed before, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great, thanks. So maybe to refer back to the stark difference that was mentioned, just a quick comment preceding my question would be that it really struck me that people were making, and I appreciate the breakdown of the accuracy of how the process works in our county, in Howard County, where I am, for the endorsements. And I read the blog also that reported on that. But one of the candidates was portraying herself as the voice of parents, and that the support for that candidate was some of the loudly critical of, oh, this is probably not a good representation of all teachers, which, thank you for talking with the blogger and helping us understand that the endorsements certainly were not the voice of just one teacher or two teachers. I thought it was ironic as well that the people complaining about that, probably the loudest complaints came from people who are right now taking up the mantle of parents. This is the parents' opinion, and I personally, and I know there are other people like me who, we're parents and those aren't our values. So so for the question, that's a kind of a different area. I know several teachers have spoken to me with a concern about human resources department that just kind of has multiple things that make it difficult to navigate and maybe not respectful of teachers. And there's, from my perspective, I might guess that the people have worked in all, actually all surrounding counties, not just mine. The people who go to work every day on the ground with the students, the educators have built this strong educational system that we have. It's been built on their backs, and I do realize that for some years now we're probably a sought after place for people to apply, and that the human resources department may be kind of if you're sought after, maybe you don't make it as easy to navigate when teachers apply, or maybe you don't act as fast. And that's just one issue. There's also issues of things that were said to teachers surrounding COVID, and a level of trust with how teachers would deal with certain COVID statuses or leave issues that just floored me. My husband is another electrical engineer, and most professionals are treated a certain way. So I'm rambling a bit, but anyway, my question is are there any suggestions on how unions might take on a department, like an HR department that has multiple issues, that also, at least in my view, the department is benefiting from a school system having a reputation that's been built on the back of the people who are teaching and or educators working with the students, you know, counselors and everybody on the ground working with the students every day.
Well, we're far from the only ones with a frustrating HR department. So I'll see if Nicole or Rashi have anything to chime in about this.
Nicole, do you want to?
Rashi, go ahead, and then I'll chime in.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's not just that HR departments are, well, first of all, in Baltimore City, they call it the human capital department, which directly translates to livestock. Yeah, HR is not meant to support the employees. Their job is to cover the asses of the bosses and make sure that the workers don't get too uppity if they can ever help it. So HR departments are never incompetent or frustrating. They're doing their job, which is not to serve the worker, it's to serve the boss. And in terms of just the point that you made about how like it's the workers who, specifically in Howard County, the teachers who make it such an appealing school district, that's not really the concern of HR in what decisions they're making. They're making decisions that can help the district and, you know, the local government, etc., to operate the way that they want to, which often means that they don't have that their desire is to make it so that unions aren't very effective. So they'll do whatever they can to curtail that. And if that means not accepting specific people or accepting other people, that's the decision that they are going to make.
I'll just add to that, and I think that Rashi and Josh would agree. I mean, with any union contract, when it comes to, you know, the protections and clarity that you want for employees, you're going to try and negotiate for that in contract negotiations, like with the hiring practices, et cetera. You know, we at BCPL wanted more information about where job openings would be, which sounds so simple, right? But, you know, we like some employees couldn't get information on like where the job, which branch was the job opening at. We have 19 branches from Sollers Point to Towson, Cockeysville, Hereford, Woodlawn, Catonsville. It would be great for employees to know where those jobs openings are. How is seniority determined, you know, in the hiring process, all those things. And some of those things, of course, can be negotiated for. They are negotiated in contract negotiations. I hope that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Nicole. Hey guys, we're at the 9 o'clock hour. I'm gonna, I'm looking at 2 Kianas. I'm gonna take one more question. If Carla, Oscar, and the other Kiana can just add your questions into the chat, we'll try to get them answered that way. But I'm not sure which Kiana is the real Kiana.
So I put the question in the chat and it's the
Okay.
one about mutual aids.
Okay, you want to say it out loud, Kiana, and then if the other person who's using your name can put their question in the chat, and then we'll get folks to answer it, and then I'm going to turn it back over to,
right.
I want to thank our speakers and ask Jake. So Kiana, ask your question.
So my question was about, what are your thoughts of having mutual aids, like the benefits of like would having mutual aids help like with workers that are on strike, because what they do is provide like food and other necessities.
Can I jump in on this a little bit? Yeah, I think it's awesome. I think we should do more of it to an unlimited amount. I think if someone mentioned in the chat, like, hey, are the Starbucks workers in Colombia organizing? I don't know if they are or if they aren't. I should know. And if they are, we should support them, like through mutual aid. It's something that there was a lot of a lot of you remember still going on, the Merriweather hotel workers, in which Unite Here Local 7 was involved with. I think that's a great example of like how all progressives, Democrats, folks who care about workers in the county rallied around Unite Here Local 7 and the workers there where the developer there was running away with money that was intended to keep people employed during the pandemic. I think it's a great example of how we can show solidarity and mutual aid in Howard County, and I'm here for all of it. I'm here for more of it.
Hey guys, I apologize. Jake said we could take some time here, so to make sure everybody get their questions answered, and I apologize, the other Kiana dropped. But Carla, do you want to ask your question?
Yeah. So I was at the primaries and I was at the early voting in the primaries. Most of the days, and there was I think I ran into only one person from your union that showed up and was only there for a short time. I'm wondering why they didn't show up, because usually I noticed they're there. There were very few apples around. I know that's a big thing. And I'm curious as to why you decided not to have people there supporting your candidates.
We did have folks at the early voting sites, but as you saw, early voting turnout was pretty low. Part of the complicating factor, again, this goes back to some misconceptions about our union, that we had paid people out doing Apple ballots, which is just nonsense. We don't pay anybody to hand out Apple ballots. It's all volunteers. And as a lot of you know, during the summer, educators go away. This is their primary vacation time. And when the primary got moved, it got moved twice. So the primary was supposed to be in June. And if it was in June, it would have been during a time when educators were still in school working. But when it got moved into July, this is prime time for folks who are away. The timing of this election was not great for handing out Apple ballots. But I expect that will change, hopefully, if the primary doesn't get moved again next year. And I think you'll see a lot of Apple ballot folks out for the general election.
Thanks, Josh. Oscar, do you want to ask your question? I know that you had your hand up for a while.
Can I have a follow-up, Karen?
Yeah, Oscar, are you okay waiting for 1 second? Go ahead, Carla.
So did you have people there on election day? On the primary? I didn't see anybody. I was at two different schools.
Election day.
Uh-huh.
We were out at Atholton in District 4, but there was not a huge presence of folks on election day. We've sent volunteers out to early voting because there were only a limited amount of sites. There were only 5 sites for early voting. On election day, there are 22 sites. So taking the same number of volunteers and distributing them out to 22 sites just wasn't practical. But for the general, that'll be a lot different.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Carla. Oscar, you want to ask your question?
Well, I had some questions. It's more of probably more from a macro level than the discussion is here, but I did want to make a comment. I take exception to Rosh's comment about HR people. I am by profession an accountant, corporate accountant, have been there for 35 years. I also was a high-level accountant at the Laborers International Union in North America, the Health and Welfare Fund. So I've been there. I had been there 6 years. Saw intimately how they managed several trust funds nationally. And so I have some experience on how they look at things and how the organization runs. But I did want to say that my feeling is that that was uncalled for to castigate HR people. There are, don't get me wrong, there are people that shouldn't be in a job. But as a profession, I think it was uncalled for. The macro level that I had questions on had to do with the FLSA and whether or not, the bottom line was, do we want to increase everybody's living standards? Going to your original question was, that all these labor laws started coming out at FDR and helping everybody progress along and created a whole ton of excellent worker protections and so forth and so on. And I'm wondering if one way of looking at this, and I'm obviously for unions, but could we look at also impacting legislation like the FLSA so that you're able to make some of these classifications professional to be included, not exempt from the FLSA, from the Fair Labor Standard Act. In other words, have push for a living wage in some of the legislation that's out there. So that's all I had to say.
Yeah, the only thing I would say about that, just a gut feeling I have, Oscar, is that if you can push for what you want for the FLSA, I agree with that. But I think unless you have strong unions, you don't get that. I think that people who aren't in unions, they don't get any benefit unless there are strong unions.
Well, I can tell you that where I first met Josh was at a group think tank for the Democrats, I guess, so we sat at a table and we tried to talk about wages and increasing wages, and I think that I was bringing up the living wage, and the response I got back from the leadership at the tables where we're pushing for $15 because we can't get any more than that. So if my answer to that is, if you're looking for crumbs, you're going to get crumbs.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree that the unions have a very strong, and it should have a very strong history, and they have very strong advocation and very strong groupings of folks that can put a lot of political pressure. But in the end, I think that perhaps part and parcel is moving the needle, also moving the needle on legislation and to relax it and make more equitable payment for everybody else. As an accountant, I can tell you that I costed out a whole lot of projects, and what I found out over a long period of time is that most of the costs that go into making anything is probably about 80% human labor, one way or another. So the question then becomes, wouldn't you want to compensate the labor, the effort, the cost effort, to where it belongs? So 80% of what you're selling should be going to folks, just from a cost perspective. So I'm seeing small incremental steps, but I'm looking at from a much more larger equitable side, and I believe that. So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Thanks, Oscar. So I want to first, I put a little bit of information in the chat while people were asking their questions about Bernie has a live stream with Sean O'Brien, Chris Smalls, Sarah Nelson, and I can't remember the other couple of people who are on that. That's going to be on Wednesday night. And so I think we did kind of talk a little bit about solidarity without actually calling it solidarity, but if you're friends with me on Facebook, I shared a tweet today, a picture of a tweet about how I can't remember the name of the coal mine that is doing this, but if you're not friends with me, feel free to friend me if you just want to see it. I think I made it public. If not, I'll go ahead and make it public. But it's just an example of what businesses do to bring in scabs and try to union bust. And so I would encourage you to follow things like Labor 411, and I don't know, Josh, Nicole, Rashi, if you guys don't put anything in the chat. But one of the biggest things you can do if you're not part of a union is you can donate to a strike fund. So I would encourage people, like when you see a strike fund come up, you've got, if you can afford it, to give some money to them. It really does help, especially for some of these people who end up being on strike sometimes for months. They need to feed their families. There is always a strike fund, but every little bit helps. And honestly, I know it upset my dad when I wouldn't buy him some of the things he likes that Nabisco makes, but I'm not buying stuff at the grocery store when those folks are on strike. So Josh, Rashi, Nicole, thank you very much. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you everyone for all the great questions, and I'm going to turn it back over to Jake.
I see Nicole raise your hand.
I just want to make a quick comment on like supporting union employees. There are a lot of ways to do that, but hey, if you wanted to come to like a legislative session for any of your elected officials and say, we think as constituents of these people that these union employees, the teachers, the library employees, we think they should get paid more. Oh my God. Like that'd be kind of cool. That'd be kind of amazing. I mean, usually it's the employees who are doing that sort of advocacy, but if someone else were like, oh my gosh, we think that they should get paid an amount of money that not only pays their bills, but they can save money. Oh my God. Yeah, I'm all for that.
Yes. Well, thank you. Yeah, to Karin for moderating the panel and suggesting the idea in the first place. This is definitely a pretty good time for the labor movement, it seems. So let's hope that that continues. And yeah, thank you to our panelists, Nicole, Josh, and Rashi. And my last comment I want to say on something that was brought up of the in terms of like the HCEA's endorsements and moving forward in terms of the stark contrast between the Board of Education candidates and in the general election between Dan Newberger, Jackie McCoy, Tootie Adler, and Lin Feng Chen. I just wanted to explain real quick why I guess why our club, Progressive Democrats of Howard County, did not endorse Dan Newberger and Jackie McCoy. Sorry, were you all able to hear me, or did that break up for a second there?
We can hear you, Jake.
Okay, sorry. But yeah, so the reason that our club decided not to endorse Jackie McCoy and Dan Newberger, and I guess why I don't view this as such a stark, clear contrast between all the candidates and why I did not support them in the primaries, because we want to talk who did the teachers union endorse on the county council. Deb Young for District 4, they endorsed because she's been, I guess, a champion for teachers in the union's eyes. So they endorsed her instead of her developer-funded police union endorsed candidate and or challenger. And I think that was a very good endorsement in the District 4 primary race. But then Dan Newberger, until just before he ran, was the treasurer of a PAC that launched incredibly vicious attacks against Deb Young, who was supported by the teachers union, misrepresenting her record, boosting the developer funded candidate who undoubtedly will not be an ally to teachers, which is, I assume, why the teachers union did not endorse him. So to me, it seems like a contradiction to endorse a county council candidate and then endorse a candidate in another race who was involved with the organization actively working to defeat that candidate. If they're working against the interests of the teacher in that regard, I don't understand how we could really trust them to act in the teacher's interests in the other regard when they've already shown that they're willing to go against it. So that I guess was my issue with Dan, and I was recruited onto the board of that PAC. And they told me well in advance of the District 4 primary that they were planning to target that race. So And then with Jackie McCoy, she has some very troubling views on, LGBTQ plus issues, and then, suggested that we use a permanent hybrid model to address a teacher shortage. I can't, so some of these, some of the endorsements did seem a little bit contradictory to me, but nonetheless, I do, am appreciative of the endorsements in District 1 and District 4. But again, that is why I do not view this as a very stark difference in the, at least for the Board of Education candidates. So I wanted to speak on that, but nonetheless, we have not endorsed in the general election for Board of Ed. So, our club can approach general election endorsements down the road. But thank you again to all of our all the panelists and the moderator and all the candidates who came this evening. And sorry it was a long meeting, but we had a lot to talk about with the primary results and then the panel as well. So unless there are any comments, questions, concerns before we go, can we call it a wrap? Okay, well then I will motion that we adjourn.
I second.
Okay.
I agree.
Yes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
I
All opposed, say nay. Okay. All
have a
right.
good night.
Yep. Good point. I have to stop the recording.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.